Hello, it's Sandra Pike from Lepage Atlantic and the Pike Group, and today we have two very distinguished gentlemen, and we are going to get a perspective about the Halifax market from a commercial standpoint and from a residential standpoint. But first, let's meet who these gentlemen are, and Ralph, we'll start with you.
Hi, Sandra. Great to be with you here today, and good to be with my good friend Gordon. It'll be sure to be an interesting conversation at the most, or at the least. My name is Ralph Stephen, and currently I'm the CEO of Royal Lepage Atlantic. And as you both know, we have businesses in two provinces, in Nova Scotia and in New Brunswick. So great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thanks. And Gordon.
Hi, Sandra and Ralph. I'm Gordon Laing, President and CEO of Southwest Properties here in Halifax, and we have about 1,800 multi-res units in the Halifax area, mostly on the peninsula, and we also have a large commercial portfolio in your home province of Newfoundland. And we also are the largest shareholder in a company called Premier Executive Suites, which we provide extended stay accommodations, and that goes right from St. John's to Victoria, with about 1,500 units in that portfolio.
So let's get right into the meat of things. And, I'm going to ask a commercial question there, Gordon. So we are in a housing crisis here in Halifax. I mean, it's not a secret. Now, with the cost of construction and everything that's going high, have you seen any high rises, for example, slowing down in Halifax, and will that affect the Halifax real estate market, for example?
So I think you're exactly right. We are in a housing crisis, and I will add that we probably could have seen this coming from as far back as 2015 in terms of supply not keeping up with immigration and demand for housing in Halifax. And it's a supply issue from my perspective. And now you've got a couple of things that are probably compounding that. You have the pandemic, when Halifax maybe was the best kept secret in the country, and now we're in a situation where we've had interprovincial migration, and work from home has allowed people from other provinces to come and discover Halifax, and which has further increased the supply challenges. And so now we're seeing things like labor shortages in the market, and for sure with construction inflation, both from a cost point of view and even a supply perspective, has created a bit of a perfect storm. And so we are now seeing the potential. I'm hearing people talk about projects slowing down. We're looking at things differently, and maybe we'll have a project or two that will have a pause as opposed to a stop, and see what happens in the marketplace. And as you know, that will only make the problem worse as people continue to come here and supply becomes even shorter.
Mm-hmm. So Ralph, I mean, I was reading an article in Nova Scotia, and they talked about Killam just pausing on their projects. Do you see that they're pausing on their residential properties that they're building, high rises? How is that going to affect us even more so in the Halifax market?
Well, I mean, I think Gordon termed it well when he suggested that it was a supply problem. We've got, I don't know, you can type my numbers up, but my guess is over the last couple of years we've had 10,000 people a year moving into Nova Scotia or so, and of those, my sense is that 60 to 70% of those folks are landing in Halifax proper. And then you've got a chunk of people that are, get to the valley, and then, in the rest of the outlying areas. So, this is not, a lot of times I think people feel sometimes things could get mischaracterized in the, as being artificially stimulated. And so there's nothing artificially stimulated. We've had steady in migration for the last number of years, and now we've hit a point where we're we're actually having people move here, and the population is growing in a way that it's starting to move the needle. So all of that is a really good thing. With growth, population growth, comes all of the corresponding problems that crime, housing crisis, traffic, all of the things that go with a growth in population. So I would say anything that messes with supply, circling back to answer your question, anything that messes with supply, such as the article that you mentioned, whether it's on the apartment rental side or it's on the ownership side, is not, it's only going to further exacerbate the situation. I mean, I don't know, look back 2012, 2013, we were in and you do this better than anyone, Sandra, in terms of analyzing the data. I would say back in those days, we would have been in, that would have been the bottom of the market. And then we went into a situation where we would have had, as the industry recognizes, 16 months worth of inventory, meaning that if not another house came on the market, it would take 16 months for the marketplace to absorb the existing inventory. So that's nobody likes that. I mean, certainly buyers like it, but anybody, that's trying to sell a house doesn't like it. And you're dealing with the other extreme of the market. And from that point, from 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, all the way to 2020, we steadily, two things happened. Obviously, demand continued to be steady, but demand was outpacing supply on a gradual basis till we hit 2020. When 2020 happened, I think everybody paused and said, okay, well, what do we got here? And what ended up happening was we injected fuel to an already fiery, the market was already heading to what I would have considered a strong seller's market at that point. And then you add the effects of the last 24 months into that, and you've got a situation where you have increased demand that can't be satiated by the supply that's out there. And certainly from Gordon's point of view, he can speak to this. There's not a lot of supply that developers and builders are bringing on stream. In the past, over the last 30 years of my real estate career, builders and developers would bring on enough supply, it would satiate demand, and it would cool the market so that things would balance out. And in fact, from a technical point of view, the best market in the world is a balanced market, meaning that there's enough houses to satisfy the amount of buyers in the marketplace, and everybody goes away happy.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I'll cut it off there. You probably have other questions.
That's good, Ralph. It's good. So with the cost of construction and the labor shortages, Gordon, that we're seeing, how would rent control, play into this? Is that a factor as well, like for some companies who are just like holding off for a little bit?
Well, I think it will be a factor as opposed to that it is a factor today. Rent control, and obviously, it'd be pretty clear that I'm against it. But it's interesting in that it's been proven in multiple jurisdictions in the past not to work. The government, the Liberal government, when in power, put together an affordable housing commission to come up with recommendations, and that commission was made up of the development community, the not-for-profit housing suppliers, government, people from the corrections profession, mental health. So it was an all-encompassing committee, and they made 17 recommendations, and one of them was that we should not implement rent control, and that was the only one of the 17 recommendations that were not followed. And I give you sort of an example, I guess, in that you've got a fairly large responsible group of landlords in Halifax, and they know their customers. And in the past, we would have been very aware of who was on fixed income, who had two-income families, and who could afford $25 more a month in rent. And so we had many people that would get 0% increase for a couple of years at a time, and then someone else might get 2, might get 3. Overall, we were somewhere close to the rent cap that exists today. And so now with costs going the way they are, you really can't take the risk that your costs are going to come down or come in line, or what may happen, not that from the unknown perspective, in 1 or 2 years. So everybody now is getting a 2% rent increase. So the people that it was meant to protect, or a lot of them, would be getting rent increases that they wouldn't have gotten in other, in other years. So you have and it was very public. You have a few bad actors who did things during the early stages of the pandemic, relative to rent evictions and those kind of things, and they should have been dealt with. But there was should have been a targeted, focused way of dealing with those to keep people in their homes through the pandemic, and as opposed to that sort of peanut butter approach that we have ended up with.
So Gordon, you mentioned about affordable housing. Ralph, what would you consider affordable housing here in Halifax if I were to purchase a home?
Look, I think ultimately, maybe a better place to start would be is what does the government of Canada consider to be 2-income family? What is it? Below $50,000 is below the poverty line. Is that what they say? Well, let's just pretend that that's what they say. Somebody else can fact check my numbers later. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where I go. I mean, for the longest time, you could borrow $100,000 and you could, it would cost you $400 a month to finance that. With the increase in interest rates, I think that $600 now is probably costing you, that $100,000 is now costing you close to $600 a month. And so, I would suggest to you that any increase in rates or any inflationary pressure is not going to affect anybody from the mid-range into the market to the upper end of the market. It just won't. People won't have to make any kind of sacrifice there. They may say, well, I'll buy a little less house, or I'll borrow a little more money, or I'll put down more of a down payment. I think generally speaking, most folks at that level of the ladder have the ability to make some choices. I think when you go down the ladder to your first time home buyer, I mean, the average house in Halifax was $300,000, not too long ago, and now it's probably cresting, what would you say, 600 grand now?
That, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so again, that becomes very, very difficult for the average working person or average working family to be able to afford that. And that is a serious issue. Alternatively, I would argue that for quite some time, it was much cheaper to buy a house than it was to rent.
Yes.
I don't know if that, with the shift in interest rates, I haven't done that calculation most recently, but I know when I did that a couple of years ago, the spread, I would suggest to folks, even if they were moving here for a few years, I get calls from friends saying, hey, look, I'm going to be, families moving to Halifax, I'm going to be there for 2-3 years. I'd always suggest to them that they should rent. They'd say, well, I'm going to be there for 5 years. I'd say, okay, you should buy then. And in pursuit of giving them that advice, I suggested to them that better idea, because it's going to be cheaper for you to buy than it is to rent. I'm not so sure that that's essentially the case anymore, because rents have had to have kept pace. I mean, I think this is the thing that a lot of folks may misunderstand when they're looking at the marketplace, is that if it cost you $100 to run your apartment, and because of, I don't know, what's the current inflation at, 6.5%, 7%, it now cost you $106 or $7 to run that apartment, but yet your rent remains the same. There's going to be a point on the graph where it's no longer economically feasible for people to invest in real estate. And it isn't a reasonable expectation to expect that either an investor or a landlord or a builder or a developer is going to absorb the cost. I just think that is, I mean, I don't want to be untoward here, but that's a delusional perspective to think that that's what's going to happen. It just doesn't work that way. 100% of the time, those costs will get passed back to the end consumer or the end renter. It's just the way that it is. I mean, nobody is going to run their business and run it as a charitable enterprise. I don't know anybody that is going to run their business as a charitable enterprise, other than somebody that is doing that out of the goodness of, just being charitable. And I know a lot of people that, as Gordon had aptly described, that would spread their rent increases to fit with the market. But at this stage, there's no choice but to absorb whatever the rent cap is, because ultimately you're not going to, if there's a level of volatility and instability there, that anybody that's making a decision is going to just take whatever increase they can take, because that's the only certainty that they have. They can't control the cost, and they can't control what other government regulation is going to be in place. And so it, in my humble opinion, it creates a level of uncertainty in a marketplace that, I'd have friends and colleagues that would look at Atlantic Canada in particular as an investment opportunity, because we didn't have rent controls, unlike say Quebec or unlike BC or unlike Ontario. They would search out Atlantic Canada because, look, the numbers were marginally less than say Quebec, Ontario, or BC, but they would make what I would call a long-term investment or a long-term play, knowing that they could eventually grow their rental revenue to sustain the investment over the long term.
So when we, just a second there, Ralph. So when we talk about inflation, Gordon, do you see Halifax in a recession to come up?
It's a great question. If I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't have to sit here. But so everything that I would read and people that I listen to certainly feel that we're headed in that direction. That will that prices should or maybe stable through 2023, and then 2024 start to see some of the impacts of inflation. And I would say, I'd suspect that when people have to renew their mortgages, and it was interesting, it was kind of explained to me. I remember, as a young person buying my first home, that I thought I had hit a home run the day that mortgages went from 14% down to 11% the day before I closed. I thought, wow, I'm a genius. And why? So why is it a big deal that mortgage rates may be 5% today? But the different way of looking at it, I think, which was an eye opener for me, was people's mortgage interest rates are doubling. It's not that they're going from 2 or 2.5 to 5. It's 100% increase in their mortgage rate. So I do worry that people that have stretched to get into homes, what's going to happen in 2024, 2025 when they reset. But the other thing that might sort of, I don't want to save us, but at least delay us a little bit, is the fact that demand is outpacing supply at the moment. So, not a typical model or scenario that would create a recession. But, if the rest of the world goes, Halifax is not going to be the only non-recession proof city in North America, that's for sure.
So although inventory is coming back to the market, Ralph, there still seems to be a hesitation with buyers. Like, I was selling homes for the past 2 years in 3.5 days. Now that same particular house could take 5 days to sell. Maybe I'm only getting one offer, or I'm only having one showing, or it's crickets. So is it because of the inflation rates? Is it because the landscape now has changed? What are you hearing?
Look, when I started selling back what seems like 300 years ago now, 30 years ago, 32 years ago, I would say the average days in the market were 145 days. And one out of every, so I don't know what the list, I'd have to have 10 listings in order for 4 of them to sell. And so, I think ultimately, I would doubt anybody would have those memories because they may not have been around for 30 years ago. But I would say not too long ago, Sandra, it was quite normal for folks to put their house on the market. Look, we would have had list to sale ratio would have been much greater than that, probably closer to 70% of every listing that you had would sell eventually. Most of the time you'd have a sale within 30 or 45 days. Again, I couldn't tell you exactly when. Doesn't seem that long ago when that was the case, as my point. And so, do I see that happening again? Yeah, absolutely. But I think that that's just a very normal evolution or ebb and flow of the market. So, I think look, I don't want to get too far off the baseline of your question here, but nobody should be surprised that we're dealing with what I would call an inflationary problem. I mean, you cannot flood the system worldwide with trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And my guess is that the folks that really needed it, which I would suggest would be maybe 30% of the population, my guess is they needed probably twice or 2-3 times as much as what they got. The folks that didn't need it basically have gone on a worldwide spending spree to accumulate any consumer good that could be absorbed in the shortest amount of time. And so, notwithstanding cottages or second properties or condos or investment real estate. And so do I expect that that's going to come off? Yeah, I think that the frenzy, you've seen it already. You've just described it. Do I see the $100,000 over ask coming off? Yeah. Do I see the 20 bids per house coming off? Yeah. But at the end of the day, I may be in the minority in my opinion here, but that's okay. As you know, I'm okay with having the debate. At the end of the day, I think that's a good situation, and I think that it would be good for the market for things to settle back down again, and have people readjust to what I would describe as a very normal in unrushed real estate market. What we've experienced over the last couple of years has been fantastic from a revenue or a sales perspective, but there's 100 other challenges that it's created for not only realtors in the industry, but lawyers in the industry, I would say buyers and sellers in the industry. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that it's created as people have stepped up to meet the increased demand. So would it be bad if things came off a little bit? No, it would not be, in my humble opinion.
Speaking of that, so we have our market, I feel, has been slowing down, and the interest rates have been increasing, and I think there was a stat came out today that lumber prices are going down. So will that mean, Gordon, what are your thoughts of deflation when it would come to new construction? I mean, people had to raise their prices in new construction, to offset, trusses or whatever were costing so much money. So will that affect our local new construction here, do you think?
So, yeah, I think it has to. But one of the things that history would say is that, prices go up and they never come down as much as they don't come down in proportion. And gas is a great example. All you have to look at is the price for a barrel of oil today or a year ago or 2 years ago, and you can see how it went up, and it never goes back to where it was, relative to that same price of oil. So lumber will be somewhat the same. There'll be certainly some profit taking and not giving that back. But those certainly are the type of things that will impact supply. They'll turn the supply trigger back on again. One of the things that, and this goes a little bit to what Ralph is saying, one of the things I'm kind of interested in, and I've not really seen sort of this laid out in a great format for all of us to look at, but is to start, what was the deficit in housing in Halifax? What are the predictions over the next 10 years for population growth and then the housing need, and how is supply keeping up with that? And then I would even further define it to say, how much of that supply requirement goes back to your earlier comment in the, the $300,000 range versus the $700,000 range, and is anything being done on the supply side to meet that demand? So I think that's because this all takes time. It's to get a project, if it's a Clayton or a Cresco, to find land, do the design, get it approved, get all the infrastructure in place, and then start to build. We're not talking months, we're talking years. So so the opportunity to react to this is going to take as long as it took us to get into the issue in the first place. So it's and I've never seen that sort of clearly articulated, is how are we doing and how long is it going to take to get rebalanced.
And so who should be articulating that? Is it someone at CMHC? Is it an economist? Is it the provincial government? Who should be doing that or looking into that study?
I would say the best group to do that would be someone in the province. Maybe they tap into CMHC because they have some local and certainly a lot of national data. But if you want to know things about Halifax, it should be someone from Halifax. So to me, it's either the municipal or the provincial government.
Mm-hmm. Well, gentlemen, great commentary today, and I really want to thank you for your time. I mean, I know you're both busy gentlemen, and no, I really appreciate you coming out.
Anytime, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.